Good day to you, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to Film Focus, episode 213, the double review for The Day the Earth Blew Up and GOAT. Well, hello there, ladies and gentlemen of North, South, East, and West, and welcome to another episode of Film Focus. I'm your host, the Hypersonic55, and I'm glad you decided to join me once again for some film-related discussion. And yes, once again, it has been a while since I posted the last review. I've been busy toiling away with my other podcast, so that has kept me busy for the last few weeks. I haven't seen too much in the way of films in the cinema. February has been a little dry, and with the films that I was interested in, they have had limited screenings or just weren't in my hometown, and running off 2 towns over to go and watch it did seem a little tedious. That being said, last week Friday at the time of recording, I did end up watching 2 films, 2 of them animated, surprisingly enough. The Looney Tunes movie I ended up seeing in the earlier side of the day, and then I saw the GOAT movie in the evening of that day. So it's been a while since I've seen 2 animated films within the same day, so I was like, yeah, screw it, we're going to go about and do a film double. So that's what we're going to be doing today. I'll start with the Looney Tunes review and then go into GOAT afterwards. And as usual, they're spoiler free, so you don't have to worry about me saying anything about particulars in the movie. I will never talk about anything beyond what was shown in the trailers, or if the trailers were too spoilery, then I'll just be like, yo, I'll be as vague as I need to be. But with all that being said, sit back, relax, and let's get into this thing. Alright, so we're going to start with The Day the Earth Blew Up, and as usual, we talk about the story, characters, and presentation. So without further ado, let's jump in. So in terms of the story, it involves Porky Pig and Daffy Duck becoming unlikely heroes and the Earth's only hope when they are faced with an alien threat that also happens to deal with a popular brand of bubblegum. And that is a way of me summarizing the film without going into the area of spoilers. Now, I have to say, I enjoyed this film quite a bit. I honestly wasn't too sure about what the story was. I just knew it involved Porky and Daffy in some sort of adventure, and there was like an alien element to it, and that was about it. But it was cool. It was a story that adhered to the principles and fundamentals of what Looney Tunes is, but also expanded it in a way which felt modern. There's modern references in terms of certain visual and verbal things that go on, but again, the scenarios that the characters face, the way certain plot beats break down. If you've seen any sort of animated content with the Looney Tunes in it, you'll sort of know how things go from point A to point B, and in terms of how the scenarios wrap up, you can sort of guess how they go down, but they are effectively done. It feels good. There's some solid humor in the film. Nothing that made me go ha ha ha, laugh out loud, but I would say it's really good. And there were also some surprises that caught me off guard in a good way, which added to the overall story. And by the time it was over, I was pretty satisfied with what I watched. And while this film is definitely going to be entertaining for children in terms of some of the jokes, whether it be visual or verbal, I think adults who are familiar with the Looney Tunes will get a lot more out of this, because there are a number of callbacks, and the way in which they handle certain things, it feels like multiple cool references, not only to Looney Tunes, but certain other pop culture stuff. And it was all handled fairly well. There was one in particular I was wondering if they were going to do, and they did it in a very obvious way, and I was very pleased. Alright, and now it's time to talk about the characters, and I thought that they were all really fun. Every person in this film brought something to the table, and it was interesting because they all had charisma, charm, a little bit of that chaotic energy that you expect from Looney Tunes, but they all had their part to play, and they all did pretty good. So firstly, we're going to start with Daffy Duck and Porky Pig. When you think of the Looney Tunes roster, besides Bugs Bunny, these 2 are the next in line in terms of the most notable faces of that series. And it was fun to see them as this odd couple living together, seeing how their journey started and progressed throughout the film. And because of the interesting dynamic, as Daffy is more chaotic and crazy, whereas Porky is more reserved, sensible, and the smarter of the 2, seeing how they find themselves in the situation where they have to save the world, have to work out their differences, come together and try to make something happen was pretty cool. And Daffy has been probably more my favorite of the two, but this is one of the stories where I did enjoy Porky's part to play more so than I have in certain other, like, Looney Tunes stuff of the past. And Eric Bowser, at least I hope I'm saying his last name correctly, he does a great job of voicing the two. Both of them sound like very distinct voices for each character, and it's always a tricky thing when you have to do voice acting and perform the voices of more than one character. And obviously, if you know your history when it comes to Looney Tunes, Mel Blanc way back when was able to voice multiple characters, and he was insane. He was so good. And while there were certain times when he did certain actions where you could tell the similarities between the performances, he did a great job of being able to make all the characters feel distinctive and different. So yeah, Bowser definitely channeled that energy and put that into this performance with both characters. And Cindy Milo, who played Petunia in the film, she was great as well. Petunia brought this other element to the film where she had her own little quirks, oddities, and fun, chaotic energy that she brought to the overall picture. She was a fun character. Obviously, her and Porky have a thing going on, and their dynamic was pretty good. And Peter McNichol as the Invader was also very good. Had some standout moments, and the vocal performance, especially during some of the more humorous sequences, were great. And then there's also Fred Tatasciore. I've never known how to say his name out loud, but he is a voice acting legend. He has voiced so many characters in loads of things for years. And I really enjoyed his performance as Farmer Jim. And even Wayne Knight, one of my favorite dudes since the 90s. He shows up as the mayor of Grandview, which is the town that the characters reside in, and he's just as fun as he always is. And also shout out to Lorraine Newman, who played Miss Gretch. She's a horrible little character, but she was, again, another notable presence in the film, and Newman's performance was great. And we can't talk about this film without talking about the presentation. This is easily the best element of the film. It's always nice to be able to see a 2D animated film, and this film adheres to the style of the original with certain ways that the characters are animated. It really feels like those old school styles of Looney Tunes cartoons that you would have seen many, many decades ago. However, it's got a modern color palette, the lighting's really good, and there's a few extra frames of animation for some of these sequences, but then there's other more elaborate things that they do with the animation which is far beyond anything that you would have seen in those early decades of Looney Tunes. And there are certain sequences which is just a feast for the eyes if you're a sucker for animation. There's all these sort of fun techniques, very different art styles, and the way in which they are able to do that classic thing of creating animation that works well with the music, it's wonderful. So much fun. And speaking of the music, there is a lovely score which is handled by Joshua Moshe. At least I hope I'm saying his last name correctly. But he created a score that felt classic, but again, a little different to the original stuff. But there are some cool audio callbacks and, again, visual callbacks to previous Looney Tunes stuff that if you know your material, like, oh wow, that was a really cool way that they were able to put that into this film. So yeah, presentation, fantastic. So now we come to the conclusion. Overall, The Day the Earth Blew Up was a delightful film. I was smiling. I was very impressed. I just had a good time with this. I wouldn't say this is like, is an amazing animated film, but it's definitely a film that left me, smiling. And this is coming from someone who's not even a hardcore Looney Tunes fan. Watching Looney Tunes back in the 90s and early 2000s, it was one of the sort of things that I ended up watching just when there was nothing else on. And watching episodes of that show, it felt like a roll of the dice, because sometimes you'd get an absolute banger episode, or sometimes you get a collection of decent episodes, but sometimes you'd get stuff that was just okay, and there was some that just made you wonder, what the hell is going on? This is boring. But hey man, this is some good stuff, and I would definitely recommend it, especially if you're a fan of classic Looney Tunes. So yeah. So next up is Goat, and I have been pretty much sold on the idea of this film for a while, just because it's Sony Pictures Animation. I've liked their last few entries, so I was curious to see what was going on with this. I like the art style and the animation, And I saw a trailer for this and I thought it looked pretty decent. I think that was around a month ago, but I mostly forgot about the contents of that, so I went into this mostly blind. And I had a good time, though there were some elements that did hold it back from reaching those high heights. But before we get into that, let's talk about the story. So, the story surrounds Will, an anthropomorphic goat who has dreams of becoming the greatest of all time in this basketball-like sport known as rawball. He does eventually get presented with an opportunity to join the big leagues and make his dream come true. However, he faces opposition at various different turns. And that's a way for me to summarize the film without going into the area of spoilers. Now, there is a lot to appreciate about this film, especially when it comes to its themes, the way it tackles societal norms, and the desire to break the status quo. Will's dream and journey to become an athlete in a world that has traditionally kept his kind out of the sport is engaging and fun. But beyond him, the film also has a focus on Jet, the Black Panther, and her story and current status, which are affected by Will and her team as well. She plays a pretty big part in this, and I think that their stories are effectively handled together and individually. Now, the film tells its story effectively and has some heartwarming moments. However, there are some issues when it comes to the way that the story unfolds. Now, it's not a problem for your film to have familiar plot beats and elements. If you effectively tell your story and do all of the key things right, then a little familiarity can be forgiven. However, I feel like this film did hit those plot beats but didn't effectively make them work as well as they could have done. There were certain things that felt like they happened a little too quickly, or certain things that felt a little unresolved. And when it comes to the way certain character situations are handled, certain moments of character development or conflict just felt flat, or again handled a little too quickly. They needed a little bit more nuance, a little bit more time to marinate before they got to the point that they got to. But yeah, just plot wise, there's just a few things here and there in the writing and the overall flow of events that prevent it from reaching those sort of peak moments that you'd expect from not only Sony Pictures Animation, but the best elements of Disney, Pixar, and DreamWorks. But now we move on to the characters, and I thought that they were all pretty good and memorable. They all have very distinctive personalities and vibes to them, and Will, he is a delight. He is a person that you can get behind, you feel for, and you really just want to see him succeed. But beyond him, you also have Jet, who is this very notable rawball player. She's had a very fantastic history in terms of being one of the best players in the history of the game, but she's also fallen on hard times and has some personal demons of her own that she has to navigate through. And Caleb McLaughlin as Will, he's great. His voice performance is pretty solid, but I think Gabrielle Union was more impressive as Jet. I didn't expect that to be Union behind there, and it's been a while since I've seen her in anything, but her voice performance was pretty good in this. And I think I'm only surprised because when it comes to animated movies, you'd prefer to have a traditional voice actor behind it, but obviously with these big Hollywood-based movies, you'll normally tend to get notable actors stepping into a voice role, and I thought that her performance was pretty solid. And I also really enjoyed Aaron Pierre as main attraction. He was hilarious. I did not expect that to be him behind the character, but he was very aggressive, very charismatic, very fun. And there were also some other performances that I quite enjoyed, especially when it came to Jennifer Lewis, Nicole Coughlan, David Harbour, Nick Kroll, and Pan Oswalt as well. But the area where this film is unquestionably strong is the visual presentation. Sony Pictures Animation proved once again why they are the best in the game at what they do. This film is vibrant, colourful, and has a very distinctive art style that feels kind of painterly, but also semi-realistic with a certain amount of detail as well. The lighting is good, and the animation, obviously it does that trademark style that they sort of adopted where it has lower frames of animation for simpler actions but gets a little bit more fluid when you get the more elaborate sequences. But the way in which they allow the camera to zoom and fly all over the place, everything feels so elastic. And during the raw ball sequences in particular, the way in which the animation goes crazy there are so many moments where I'm just like, yo, this just feels fantastic to watch. I'm watching magic in motion. And again, there's certain ways that they adopt certain anime traits that they implement into the sequences, which is also very good. And when it comes to the film score, I wanted to touch upon that real quick. That was handled by Chris Bowers. Now, I've seen Chris's work in a few different projects here and there, and it sort of fluctuated in terms of quality for me. I liked what he did with The Wild Robot, and I feel like his music for this film is solid, but I wouldn't say it was like crazy good. So to conclude, GOAT is a good time. While it doesn't reach those high heights that I had wanted, it has an effective story, very, very good presentation, and memorable characters that would make it worth watching in the cinema. So if you have the time, definitely give it a watch. So now I turn it over to you, ladies and gentlemen. What did you think of these films? Did you see The Day the Earth Blew Up, or GOAT, or both? Let me know in the comment section below, or hit me up on Instagram where I'm at Film Focus Podcast. At least I think that's the name that's on there. Just look up Film Focus, you should be able to find us there. And be sure to check out the podcast socials on the place formerly known as Twitter, Instagram, and TikTok. And I'm also Hypersonic55 in other places on the internet. Thank you for listening as always, and until the next time, this is the Hypersonic55 signing out. Peace.